Welcome to the January meeting of the Long Island Railroad Long Island Bus Committee. Are there any public comments? Right now that Ira can't sit at the table, he is relegated to the public speaking stand.
Well, I don't consider it relegated, but thank you, Mitch.
Just for you, Ira.
I'm just
relegated.
Well, yeah. As a lapsed board member, there was a few. Bill Henderson's going to talk about the cuts. I'm sure we have to have a full discussion about them. There's some questions from the Long Island Communities Council about them and what they really mean, especially at the bottom of the list of cuts is something about reduced maintenance. I think we need a further explanation on that and something about the extras list. But on the, I'd like to just go to a few items on the agenda quickly. One thing I don't think we ever took note of before is the paratransit ridership is skyrocketing on Long Island Bus. That's an interesting phenomenon. I don't know if there's an explanation for that. Regarding the monthly operating report, I know the Long Island Communities Council had asked a while ago if we could have a standees report included in that, and I'm looking forward to seeing that. I'd just like to know when that's going to be. Let's see. And I'd like to note the good diesel performance from November. It'd be interesting to see December with the snowstorm. And on a final note on the snowstorm, I think that I noticed there's two procurements, one for a new jet engine because one failed that was during testing. I'm happy to see the railroad's active on that. And an emergency procurement for new equipment for a snowblower. I know the President and I had a conversation about the stranded train and how the railroad should approach in the future problems like a severe snowstorm and whether you want to run service or not. And I think that's something we should actually think about. But I see there's a commitment here to buy the equipment to actually be able to run service in a severe snowstorm. And I applaud that decision, and I applaud the quick action of management to do that. And I'm thankful. Getting back to the cuts again, I really do think that we had the discussion among our members at the Long Island Communities Council, and there's a thinking that we should consider how much does the service cost that we're cutting. It'd be good to get numbers on that, and would it be possible to consider a surcharge to pay for some of these services for certain rides, and would then be able to save service, especially situations where we're going to completely discontinue service. I mean, I know there's low ridership, but I think that's something that we'd like to see considered. In conclusion, I look forward to returning next month. The Assembly sponsor of the bill assured me that it would pass today. So,
but not by 4:15.
Today would mean, like, I don't know, when they get out of session. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ira. I know, Bill, go ahead. Then we'll talk. Go ahead.
No, as Ira noted, I don't want to get into any specifics. We'll have plenty of time to do that with the public hearings next month, actually the month after next. But I do just want to share with you the feeling of the members of the Long Island Railroad Commuter Council. We're very concerned that what's happening here is more than just a service cut. It's actually a change in the mission of the railroad. When you're talking about doing things like cutting off the Greenport service, except for summer weekends, when you're talking about doing things like going to hourly service on Port Washington and off-peak hours, and particularly when you're talking about cutting off overnight service to Brooklyn, which I think the folks in Brooklyn had looked to support their revitalization of downtown greatly. They were hoping that would be a perfect way people could attend events in downtown Brooklyn and then take the train back to Long Island. I think there's a real feeling that this is a game changer. We realize that the prospects for additional funding to fill some of these gaps are not good. They don't appear to be good, but we urge you to keep looking. And we will keep looking. We will keep talking with our elected officials, and we hope to be able to work with you to try to find ways to if not eliminate these cuts, at least soften the blow on folks who may have no other choice if the service is eliminated. Thanks.
Thank you, and we'll have more to talk about when we get into the issue of the service reductions on both Long Island Bus and Long Island Railroad. We would like to see at some point, Helena, when you get a chance, I agree with Ira, a standees report would be helpful. I know Metro North does that because I've seen that in their report. So however we can incorporate that into the reporting issues that occur each month, that would be helpful to see exactly where that is and where it occurs in that regard. Anyone else? That's it? Okay. Approval of the minutes of November 9th. I will move them. Bob will second them. We will all say aye. And we will move on to MTA Long Island Bus. Joseph.
Okay. We have an updated Long Island Bus Committee work plan for 2010.
Here's Nancy. That's okay.
And I request the committee's approval.
So move on the updated, anybody have problems? Okay, go.
Operations performance overall, November bus service was strong. AM and PM weekday pullouts were both 100% for the month of November. Completed trips were 99% for both the month of November and the previous 12 months. MDBF was 4182 in November, which is up an impressive 87% from the previous November. Fleet performance has continued to improve as a result of new bus deliveries and best practices are rolled out throughout the company. The 12-month MDBF is 23.8% higher than it was a year ago. In regard to safety performance, the 12-month rate for bus collisions per million miles traveled worsened slightly by 9.2%. We have changed some of the way that we correlate the information. The 12-month rate for employee on-duty lost time accidents have improved by 18.4%. Bus ridership continues to trend downward. Fixed route ridership will remain flat for the month of November. Total ridership over the previous 12 months was down 5.4%. Weekday ridership was down 3.0% and 5.4% for a 12-month period. Weekend ridership was up 7.0% for the month of November, but down for a 12-month period. Paratransit ridership continues to increase. In comparison to 2008, our ridership increased 6.3% for the month of November and 5.7% for the previous 12-month period. Our finance report, fixed route fare box revenue was higher than mid-year forecast by 2.5%. However, year-to-date is still 1.2% below mid-year forecast. Paratransit farebox revenue was better than mid-year forecast by 24.7% for the month of November. It is 10.1% above forecast year-to-date. Our actual non-reimbursable expenses for the year-to-date through November before non-cash adjustments were lower than mid-year forecast by 5.9%, and this underrun is primarily because of lower CNG fuel expenses. We have no ratifications or competitive procurements this month, but we do have one non-competitive procurement for the committee's approval. The non-competitive item is a sole source miscellaneous service contract to Kronos for hardware and software and maintenance support products and service. The lead agency on this contract is Bridges and Tunnels. The Kronos system supports our shared services implementation as a direct interface to the planned financial and human resources P4Soft modules. The total amount of Long Island Bus portion of the contract is not to exceed $61,000. I request the committee's approval for this non-competitive procurement.
Second, any questions, comments? All in favor? Aye.
We have two work plan items to report as information this month. First is our capital program quarterly report for the fourth quarter report of 2009. Some major accomplishments were the Hempstead Transit Center facility upgrade project was finally completed. This project includes the installation of new heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system and some structural upgrades. And the new bus wash was installed at the paratransit facility, and the closeout of this project is expected during the first quarter of 2010. We also gave a conditional notice to proceed for 40 more Orion buses for next generation natural gas buses to be delivered by the end of 2010. This replaces buses that are either at 12 years old or have hit 500,000 miles past their useful life. The second work plan item is the quarterly bus technology report. This report covers the status of various bus technology projects. The next item concerns the development of service reductions to address the MTA's financial deficit and advancement of advance the public hearing process. Our funding issues still lie with Nassau County, but we'll see how it turns out. I'd like to have Tom Charles first talk about some what we're going to do with Able Ride, and then after that, Norm Silverman has a small presentation he'd like to give.
Okay.
Good
Gentlemen.
afternoon. Good afternoon. For 2010, we're proposing some service-related changes. The first area is elimination of non-ADA trips. Under the ADA regulations, we're required to provide service within 3/4-mile corridor of fixed route service. Over the past, when there has been capacity, we've allowed trips into areas that are not serviced by fixed route. For 2009, that represented about 9% total trips. With this need for reducing our costs, that's one area that we would eliminate the non-ADA trips. It represents, as I said, about 9% of the trips. Two other areas that the regulations allow have been difficult to implement, but we're going to attempt to improve on our software to accomplish this, is integrating paratransit trips with fixed route service, known as feeder service, as well as trip-by-trip eligibility. Some of our customers are able to make use of fixed route for some of their trips, not all of their trips. This will require us to look at their pathways and determine which trips would be totally provided by paratransit and which would be either a partial feeder or all feeder service. The trip-by-trip eligibility would also look at things like seasonal. Generally, we define months of extreme weather for the summer and for the winter that allows customers to travel on paratransit. We would now take this a step further by tying International Weather Service reports for day of service. When it reaches a certain degree that would exacerbate medical conditions, we would provide the service. In those days that are not, we would recommend the fixed route service. Other non-service related cost reductions, we're looking to see if we can implement the use of car service or vouchers. We've used that in the city. We would enter into a contract with car services. They run their operation at a cheaper cost per trip. We would try to take advantage of that. And we'll also look at the eligibility determination process to see if we can be more rigorous in our eligibility determinations. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Tom. Norm?
All right. As you know, all the members of the MTA family are engaged in a service analysis, service reduction evaluation process. And we're trying to do it exactly in the same manner as New York City Transit and MTA Bus are doing. Robert, can I have the first slide? And again, this is the framework that we use to develop the proposals. It's absolutely consistent. It gives us the guidelines that we used. The most important thing at LIB is we're trying to affect the fewest customers we can and maintain the integrity of the core network, which represents 98% of the ridership of the system. There are a number of areas at LI Bus where there are partial services, or part-time services, well underused services, and we're taking this opportunity afforded by this budget crunch to change or remove some of those services. Next. Again, the measures that we used were total usage on a route or a part of a route in some cases, cost per passenger, geographic area coverage and topography, and alternate service available. As Tom Prendergast said earlier at the Transit Committee meeting, the art of what we're doing is not absolutely dollars and cents on every issue. There is a level of judgment in the interplay of those factors, and we are using that to the best we can to try to meet very difficult budget constraints, but yet maintain the integrity of the core system. Next. These are the categories of the types of changes that are being proposed for LI Bus and will be part of the public hearing in early March. Entire route discontinuations, that are routes that have very low ridership, very high cost per passenger, declining trend with no likelihood of reversibility, and available alternatives. In some instances, though, there are no available alternatives. I know Joe and I have talked about this a lot. The nature of a suburban system and the wide distance between some of the routes and the spacing that you have. In some instances, there aren't alternatives. In some instances, there are. We also continue to see if we can reroute or discontinue a segment of a route. We also look at something we call span of service, that is the hours of service. And in some instances, peak period services work, but the midday service on a particular route or a portion of a route doesn't work very well. And lastly, we try to streamline a route where we can. That is, run it straighter and faster. That saves us cost if it still serves reasonable travel demands. Next. Again, this is a summary of the differences between last year's 09 plan and this 2010 proposal. There are two reductions in the 29 plan that are no longer on the table, and that is the discontinuation of the N51 and N80. They were taken off the table because of geographic coverage issues. We would have allowed large segments of Nassau. There's certain corridors that would have no service if that were to occur. The following were maintained, as you can see from 09, the discontinuations that are listed there. And then the third category is those that are being considered for the first time. In summary, the net annual savings for the 2009 plan was $1.30 million in fixed route. The net savings for the 2010 plan is $1.89 million. The difference in the increase is because of the worsening financial condition that we experienced since the 2009 plan was first developed. Next slide. I have a series of slides that list each action with a map and describe them. I'll give you a flavor of some of the ones that are more compelling. I can go through every one if you want the time, but I think it'll take more time than you would like. So I'll go through 3 or 4 and then hopefully...
That's fine.
Okay. This is an example of one. The N53 is a peak period only service that runs in North Merrick. It runs around the Merrick Avenue corridor. It's very, very lightly used. We actually use a van. This is the only route we currently operate a van on. There are 45 weekday customers. They are reasonably adjacent, not absolutely convenient, but reasonably adjacent to the N51 route that we're going to keep, which is why we're keeping the N51. As you can see, the cost per passenger, and I focus on the direct operating cost, is $12.54 a customer on this route compared to an average fare of $1.38. So that's about 9 times the average fare, 8 to 9 times the average fare. Again, passengers per trip are 5. Net annual savings is $130,000. This is extremely compelling because the numbers are extremely low. There's no other reduction that we can implement that makes any sense. It simply isn't cost effective to maintain the service. Next slide is a map of the N53, and you can see the red line. It's a loop that runs through the North Merrick area, and you can see the N51 that we're retaining bisects that loop. Next. Another example, N14, North Rockville Center Loop, serves the Rockville Center Central Business District to the extent that there is one, and the railroad station, of course. And ridership, route has been there a long time, but the midday service is particularly underutilized. During the midday period from approximately 10 a.m. to about 3 p.m., we're averaging about 4 passengers per trip. The direct operating cost for this is $8.23 for each of those 4 passengers per trip. Again, very, very costly to operate. We would keep the peak period service. It would be prolific peak period service. It would still serve all the trains during the peak period, but the midday service would be discontinued under this proposal. And if you go to the next page, you'll see a map of the Rockville Center Loop. Now, this is an example of where there aren't convenient alternatives when this does not operate. But again, it would only be in the middle of the weekday period. During the expanded peak periods, it would continue to operate. Next slide. This is an example of a very, very small change that we actually think is positive. There's a branch of the N23. The N23 is a north-south route between Manor Haven and Mineola. Connects with a lot of east-west travel corridors, Port Washington Railroad Station, Mineola Railroad Station. And there is a branch, if you look on the next map, Robert, why don't you go to the next map, you'll see that the dark red line is a divergent branch that was started as an experiment a number of years back. And we run 2 a.m. trips and 2 p.m. trips And the problem with it is not only do we carry very few passengers, but we do so at the expense of the main corridor service, which is not the way you want to run service. So we have gaps in service along Main Street when we shouldn't. What we will do with this change is basically take some of the resources from the harbor, so-called Harbor Road branch, put them on Main Street. That's why the savings here is very small, because we'll provide actually a better service and a consistent service, and that's something you've heard me talk about an awful lot in the various months I've been here, about providing uniform and consistent service. And this is actually a positive change overall, although the few people are tripping. I'll give you the number. Robert, if you go back to the previous slide, I think the number passengers per trip are 3 people per trip. So we're operating 4 trips. It's an order of about 12 passengers for all that service. Next, please. I could go through more of them, but I think you get the flavor. I did 3 of them, and I think you have the flavor. Again, I want to emphasize that we're looking at the most underutilized services. Most of these are part-time, partial services that have very, very low utilization and very low ridership. If anybody has any questions or wants more, I'll be happy to answer them.
No, I just have a comment that from those 3 examples, it seems like, in a way, it sounds easy to say whatever we're losing the most money on or the least used or what we need to eliminate, but then you have a million real personalities that get involved in real life situations, so I know these are difficult decisions, but some of them are just so blatant in terms of with this credit crunch we're in at the MTA. I don't think we're left with much of a choice, unfortunately.
Well, all of the, somebody want to put the lights back on, I guess? All of the reductions are on the MTA website for people to see. We encourage people to communicate to us about the specifics or the generalities. There obviously is going to be a public hearing on the matter in the beginning of March. We would encourage people to come out and do that. I think, and I'll have more to say about this when we get to the Long Island Railroad service reductions issue, but as Nancy clearly pointed out, the question is the criteria to be used. And is it just a dollars and cents evaluation? Or are there other criteria which should be used in the discussion of which services to be reduced? That is a very, very subjective decision. And it's a public policy decision which this MTA board has to decide upon. Because it's very easy to say we'll cut the lowest 10 routes, either in number of people or cost per rider. That's the easy way to do it. The harder way to do it is to use different criteria and determine what may or may not be more important to the community at large. But that is much more subjective than it is objective. So and that's a decision this board is going to have to make between now and whenever we make that decision, March or April, after the public hearings. It is not an easy decision in that regard. But I would encourage people to look at these. I've talked to Joe, and Joe knows my position on the Jones Beach issue. I feel that's a mistake, but I leave that to the discussion, the larger discussion, because I think that sets a perception issue above and beyond a cost issue, but that's using a different criteria, and I understand that from that perspective. But these reductions are proposals at the moment. They relate obviously to the financial situation of the MTA at the moment, and they also relate to the discussion which is going to ensue in the next couple of months at the public hearing, and then we will go from there.
We tried to do it, so we tried to surgically look at our cuts and see how could we have the least impact on our ridership. Yeah. But the problem is, in a suburban setting, the alternatives don't exist in Long Island that exist for MTA bus and New York City Transit. So we tried to do it the best we could. We had a target to reach due to the lack of funding, and we'll see where it goes from here.
Yeah, now I understand it is a much more difficult situation because I think we all agree that in many instances in Nassau County there is no reasonable alternative without the bus, because in different places in the region, there are reasonable alternatives, whether it's the railroad, Metro North, the subway system, whatever it is. In that case, if it's not the car or it's not the bus, there is no reasonable alternative. The question is, how much of that should play into the discussion, and as a result of that, who should pay for that discussion? Because depending upon which side of the answer you come down on will depend upon how much it will cost you and how many people you transport. But as I said, that's a larger discussion which this board has to have and will have in the next couple of months. Before we quit, Ira did ask the question about why we think paratransit is substantially up, even under the current system. Do we have any idea other than
I don't know, Tom.
they like us for the moment?
November, we're about 6%, which is like a normal, it's basically a normal growth month. That's a normal percentage for the month.
Yes, the growth rate has been pretty steady. The non-ADA has been declining while the capacity needs for ADA eligible has been increasing. It's been a trade-off. But the net effect is an overall growth.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay?
Good.
Thank you, Norm and Tom.
Thank you.
That concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Joe.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Alina.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move quickly to the Long Island Railroad agenda. We have no work plan item. I'm going to go right to the financial report, and that's Mark Young.
Good morning. We'll cover quickly the regular financial report. I believe Helena Williams. Oh, that's right. Good afternoon. Jerry corrected that. I forgot. And then I know.
Almost good evening.
Yes. Helena will discuss the service reductions later on in the presentation. But on the regular financial report, the book contains the ridership figures through November, but I have the preliminary year-end numbers. Through year-end 2009, we carried roughly 83 million passengers, which is, no surprise, 4.4 million less passengers than last year. So we ended the year with a drop of ridership of 4.8%. Commutation was down by a greater percentage. It was down 6.4%, primarily, I believe, due to the decline in the job market. Total jobs in the region were down 2.2% compared to last year. However, in our core customers, which are in the financial and professional business industries, the drop was even more significant than 2.2%, ranging from 4 to 6%. So commutation was down 6.4% compared to 2008. Non-commutation was down 2.8%. And that's the ridership report. Let me quickly turn over to Jerry Ring for some financial and budget numbers.
Thank you. A summary of the Railroad's financial report for November can be found on page 6 of the Railroad section of the book. More detailed financial statements on cash and accrued can be found on the subsequent pages. Total revenue for the through November was right on forecast year to date. However, farebox revenue is unfavorable to forecast by $5.8 million or 1%. Regarding expenses, and looking at the numbers before factoring in depreciation and other non-cash items, we are running favorable to the mid-year forecast. Year-to-date, total expenses are $41 million or 3% favorable to forecast. Labor expenses remain close to forecast year-to-date, and the headcount data can be found on page 17 of the report, but the three major operating departments continue to have a vacancy rate of less than 1%. Non-labor expenses remain favorable to forecast by approximately 13%. The resulting farebox ratio for November is 48%, which is almost 4 points above the forecast. Are there any questions?
Any questions from anyone? Okay.
Okay, we're going to turn now to our status of operations. But before Ray gives the regular report, I did want to bring you up to date on our analysis of the December 19th, 20th snowstorm. On the weekend of December 19th, 2009, a major blizzard, the most severe to affect the region since 1996, caused a major service disruption on the Long Island Railroad. While most trains and customers reached their destination during the storm within a reasonable time frame and with minimal inconvenience, there were some aspects of our response that clearly were unacceptable and we need to make improvement on. And that was, in particular, one train out of the 375 we ran from 4 p.m. on Saturday to noon on Sunday. One train was delayed 3 hours. The engine shut down when it ingested snow. When the train was going to be towed, they found that the coupler had frozen in the severe weather conditions, and it took additional time then to unfreeze the coupler. In total, the train was stranded approximately 3 hours, and it did get I think significant media coverage, which
That's putting it mildly.
yeah, with calls for food and water, et cetera. I do want to comment that when the engine shut down, while there was emergency backup lighting, the basic lighting was off. The toilet does not operate when the power is off on the train. So that was why we had toilet servicing issues and a report of a toilet overflowing. I will say that, this was a significant event and one that required that we really investigate, what happened and what our service plan calls for under those circumstances. So there were some particular findings that I want to share with you in my own investigation, as well as some actions that we're taking. First and foremost, this was a major blizzard, snowstorm. The train did shut down, and one action was we should have deployed the police immediately. The police, in fact, did report and boarded the train, and they maintained plenty of contact with customers. But there was of the 3 hours, there was probably about an hour delay in getting the police to report to the scene. When they actually got the notification to report to the scene, they were there in about 23 minutes, which, given the conditions at that time of night and the amount of snow on the road, was really extraordinary. We're working with Kathleen Finneran, our chief of police, to make sure that we tighten up the protocols on a train. When you're in a blizzard condition, you can anticipate that you're going to need police and not wait until it's officially in a stranded train mode. We would ask the police to do official head counts for us and report those so that we can log them in. We also would ask that they formally evaluate and identify any evacuation alternatives. It was very clear, and police reported anecdotally, no, there were no opportunities for evacuation. As you may know, this is single-track territory. You could not do a train-to-train evacuation, and it was not feasible to actually offload people onto the ground because the snow drifts were, at that point, up to about 3 feet. But we want to more formally document that as an evacuation alternative protocol. We also need to have more formal reporting by crews with regard to drifts. The issue here was that the train hit 2 snow drifts, very large at that point. There were 26 inches of snow, but the drifts were much greater. And the drift actually was what ingested into the train engine and shut it down. There's been a lot of discussion about communications on board the train. And as you know, Long Island Railroad almost 2 years ago employed a cell phone strategy. This particular crew, however, was a standby crew, a drill crew. They had been put on standby to operate equipment because of the blizzard conditions. Drill crews do not normally have cell phones. While we wouldn't think it practical or affordable to issue them cell phones on a regular basis because the drill crew works in a yard, if we're going to use a drill crew on standby, then we would issue them one of our pool phones so that, in fact, you could maintain better communications with them. I will say that the crew did do a very good job of getting radio communications, and they did try to share that with the customers on board. However, I have received various reports from individuals who are on board that said, yes, there were communications, but you have to understand, Helena, if all you're hearing is bad news, it seems confusing to the customer and upsetting to the customer, and that they would like more regular communications. Of course, our goal is to give, concise information and to have it be information that everybody, can rely on. One of the problems here is they said that a rescue train was coming to tow it, so that sounded like good news. Then the next piece of information was the coupler is frozen and we can't couple up to tow the train. Now we have to defrost the coupler. So that was then, to the customer, another series of bad news, bad information. Now we're waiting some more. How long are we waiting for that, was the question. So it was a very difficult situation. I will say firsthand reports from the police when they did board in an hour and 23 minutes, that they talked to customers, they walked through the trains, and the customers were very calm, but frustrated. It certainly was an extraordinarily frustrating situation for customers in a difficult snowstorm. We need to examine ways in which we can better protect the couplers. And Ray and I met with various railroads in the Northeast. Some of them do use different techniques to sort of wrap up couplers, burlap or canvas. They bag them in ways that we're going to examine. Ray has indicated that we did that at one time on the railroad, but it didn't prove beneficial. We're going to look at if there's, better techniques that we can employ for protecting couplers. We also are going to develop a strategy that says we double end any of the diesel equipment we use. We would have an engine at the front and an engine at the back, so that if one engine fails, you have a backup engine in order to try to protect the level of service you're offering. Now, all of this does require us to take some actions. Those are just our preliminary findings. We've taken a very concrete action, which Ira Greenberg noted in his public speaking remarks. You'll see a ratification of a purchase of additional snow blowing equipment, which we thought was very important to be able to better maintain the tracks during major snowstorms. The second is to address what happens when we are in very significant accumulations of snow. As you know, the third rail is, between 10 and 13 inches. When you start to get snow that exceeds the third rail, it becomes very packed on the shoe contact. One thing that's wonderful about the M7 equipment is that we actually get diagnostic reports that show when the circuitry is not making contact. And we clearly had reports showing that there were challenges between the 10 and 13 inches, and that you'd had intermittent power loss. We made the decision that night to migrate over to diesel equipment. But we want to adopt a policy that you would read throughout our winter storm operating plan that formalizes that and addresses the fact that between 10 and 13 inches, we're not going to be able to rely on third rail power. We've got to go to diesel. We have limited diesel equipment. So we've got to be in a position that we utilize that equipment to get passengers home and then employ partial or temporary shutdowns of service, suspensions of service. Until then, we regroup the snow blowing equipment, the train equipment, and then be able to move customers with the diesel equipment. We'll be revising the documents necessary to implement that plan. I've distributed for you the Winter Storm Operations Corporate Strategy Statement. As you can see in the statement, that you really have to start to begin making these decisions when you're at about 9 inches of snow, because you can't just, at the drop of a dime switch from electric to diesel. Of course, there are lots of elements in, when a snow occurs, where your customers are. Our philosophy is that if we bring them into work, we got to bring them home. So we have to make sure we're deploying a strategy that lets customers know what their travel options will be if we get really, again, significant accumulations of snow. I want to point out that this was the first snowstorm since 1996 that gave us 20 inches of snow. Hopefully it'll be another 13 years before we get another one of those. But in the event that we don't go that long of an interval, we'll be ready with a concise customer message in terms of being able to make travel options available to our customers so they'll know what to expect with regard to the level of service we can safely provide. So that's our goal on that. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Anybody have any comments on? I think obviously it's a learning experience, and I guess one of the questions that has to be answered, and there is no right answer, is if you have a large number of people who came in the morning to the city, and then you get 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 inches, whatever, is it better to keep those people at Penn Station where there is food and other options as opposed to putting them on the train with the possibility that they will not be able to get all the way home? I mean, to that there is no right answer. It is a subjective call as to which we believe is better for the largest number of customers at any one point in time.
I think you phrased the question, exactly the way we've been talking about it for, in great detail. One of the challenges for us is that during a weekday daytime snowstorm, it is extremely important that we get our customer information out there as quickly as possible about what will happen, because what we don't want is customers to flood on the subway system to Jamaica, where we have limited ability to handle customers with train service suspended. So we have to be very careful in how we manage where we can move customers. And Ray and I have been looking at alternatives that rely on, for example, service, that would be connecting out of Brooklyn, for example. If you had to do, a sweep of service out of Manhattan to get, let customers know this is your last opportunity to head east because we will be facing temporary suspensions of service. How can you best effectuate that? And then let customers know that don't go to Jamaica. Jamaica will be secured, shut down. We'll rely on police assistance to ensure that we don't get platform crowding there. And as you point out, the best location is Penn. Because there is, waiting room, restroom, food, drink, opportunity, to have firsthand information about where the train service, is going to be to restart. The policy that we put together even identifies, the primary branches. The issue is restarting train service. Once you have that much snow, sometimes you're using your equipment just to keep the rails clear. And while you don't have customers on the equipment, you need to run the equipment just to keep as much of the rail clear as possible, following the big snow blowers. And then, primary branches would be the first to come back in a recovery. We've identified the secondary branches and the tertiary branches, where then you bring service back. Generally, as you know, with this particular snowstorm, Suffolk County was in a state of emergency. They had difficulty plowing out parking lots. And while the rest of Manhattan, the snow was already melting, it barely got to 10 inches here. Suffolk was inundated. We went and helped them plow some of their parking lots because customers needed to be able to get into work. They're applying for FEMA funds. We'll put in for reimbursement on, those parking efforts, those parking lot efforts. But again, we thought that the recovery effort went very well given the condition that Suffolk County was in. But again, we've learned from this experience. We have to do better. The The goal is to keep train service running. We want customers to have that option, but at the same time know that there are limitations to what we can offer.
Anybody
Okay.
else?
I think,
Okay.
I'm going to turn to Ray for the monthly report.
Okay, and I'm going to keep things moving quickly to give Helena time for the presentation on the,
We have a 5:15 purchase.
Right. we're
Okay,
going
so I'll go
fast.
with-
Come on, talk fast.
I'll go as quickly as possible.
We're on or close.
The operating report is on page number 30. I'm just going to go into the year-to-date information to save some time. We were able to set on-time performance records in 3 categories, in each case breaking the record from last year, 2008. The overall is 95.21. The AM is 95.72. The PM was 94.64, and the off-peak was 95.40. We also had a total of 81 100% rush hours during 2009, and that tied a record that was set back in 1993. Our AM car availability was met each day during the month of December, and 99% for the entire year. And I'm just going to do 1 month of MBDF because we don't have December records yet. But the total fleet MBDF was 198,999. That's a new record, breaking the record that we set in October, and the goal was exceeded for the M7, M3, the DE, the DM, and the total diesel fleet. One important event, of course, was our New Year's Eve operation, where with the cooperation of the MTA police, we had a successful operation and helped by the fact that we had banned alcohol for the event.
You don't have to mention it. I was going to, but that's okay.
Okay.
I'm saying to myself, words out of his mouth.
And also, just in one reference to the storm, is the fact that the MTA police, as Helena had mentioned, were of great assistance, and that we in the operations division are committed to getting the snow plans updated as quickly as possible.
And I just wanted to congratulate the maintenance crews on the MDBF. I mean, that is a tremendous achievement, especially as Ira and I both know on the diesel fleet, which is taken its lumps over the years, but clearly is expanding its opportunities here and its options, and it's getting much better in that regard. So the plans that both, the railroad put in with regard to the operations of the diesel fleet obviously is working in that regard, and that's very important to our commuters, many of whom rely on the diesel fleet to get home in that regard. So, yes, congratulations.
Thank you, Mitch, and that concludes my report, and unless there are any questions, we're
Nope.
finished.
Okay, I'm going to turn to Chief Finneran. Could you just give us highlights on police report?
The crime report is located on page 49, and the highlight would be for the month of December, we did have a overall 22% decrease in major felonies, which is nice to report on. Also, as everyone has mentioned, we were redeployed for the snowstorm, and for New Year's Eve, which was a great success, we had a reduction in our number of aided intoxicated persons, which I would say was due to the ban on alcohol. Any questions? I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, and we're going to go next to the capital program report. Kevin, just do highlights, Atlantic Terminal. We're very excited about that.
For the month of December, we achieved 4 highlights: Atlantic Avenue Terminal, Atlantic Avenue Viaduct Rehabilitation Phase 1, Babylon Espion signal design, and the Maintenance Way Repair Facility renovation. The standard updates for the other projects are found on page 53.
And I've heard, I have not been there yet, but I've only heard tremendous comments regarding the Atlantic Terminal, the new project, and I know that came up at CPOC this afternoon, and everybody I have talked to has seen it. Their major question is, this obviously was not done by MTA, which is hopefully a response we will get with other projects following in the footsteps of Atlantic Terminal in that regard. But it's been a tremendous achievement, and everybody should feel very good about what they've accomplished there in that regard.
I just have to, comment personally. Kevin Tomlinson and Rich Oakley and their team have been living and breathing completion of Atlantic Terminal.
Yep.
They did an outstanding job. It is a very beautiful facility. and we think our customers will be very satisfied with that.
And if we could just figure out how to make that now Penn Station, we'd all be happy.
The notion of sunlight coming down
Yes,
on
sunlight.
railroad and
Sunlight.
subway tracks is just incredible. It is a very beautiful facility. I'm going to turn now to our information items, starting on page 56 in your book. There is an information item on the Long Beach service. It refers to the Hog Island Powell Creek Bridge work. Due to the change in the date of the committee meeting, this information is being reported actually after the first weekend of track outage, which was this past weekend. The weekend went very well. OTP was 97.29% on Saturday and 99.22% on Sunday. There were no issues associated with the busing program over the 48-hour period, and the engineering department reported that the work went well. They remain on schedule. Ridership was reported to be very light on the buses. Our communication strategy worked to let customers know in advance that there would be a service outage. We will operate the same program next weekend and then again in March for 2 weekends, in May for 2 weekends. This is a major infrastructure renewal project with 2 important bridges preserving Long Beach service well into the future, Hog Island and Powell Creek bridges getting replaced. I'd also like to call your attention to page 57, where we have 2 information items. These are joint procurements with Bridges and Tunnels and New York City Transit, respectively. One is for secure document destruction services, and one is for uniform supply and distribution. This is part of the effort to ensure that we all are doing joint procurements in the most reasonable way going forward, and achieve savings by, acquiring these services together. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those.
Any questions on those information items? If not, okay.
Okay, that brings us now to our service reduction staff summary, which we have provided to you in memo form. I know that you've heard the, the criteria, previously. Unfortunately, we learned that our underperforming revenues in the mobility tax produced an approximately $400 million gap. That was just weeks before the end of 2009. To meet that deadline, the board approved a budget that included service reductions, and we are now moving forward providing greater detail with regard to those service reductions. The goal was to affect the fewest number of riders possible, to minimize the negative effects to riders, to operate service within existing service and capacity guidelines, and to maintain network coverage. We tried to meet those goals, but I'll say there was a challenge in terms of the target we needed to meet in terms of savings, $6.3 million in 2010 and $11 million in 2011. We did select areas that affected the fewest number of riders possible. We tried to ensure that there were alternative services available in most instances, and we're trying to make sure that we pick train reductions that are within service and capacity guidelines, which is a very important point on standees. As you collapse train service into other trains, you're increasing the number of standees. Our guidelines are, 95% seated capacity. When we start to exceed that, we're well over where we want to be in terms of standees. So we will be trying to report on that with, more real-time standee information. As opposed to the standee information that we generally have, which is, based on annual ridership projections. With regard to the fourth goal of maintain network coverage, I do want to point out that in one area we fell short, and that is Greenport. There is a service reduction proposed for weekday and weekend service from Greenport to Ronkonkoma. And that train service reduction, while it preserves train service on weekends in the summer, the only reasonable alternative for customers is actually to drive to Ronkonkoma. And while we have wonderful electrified service from Ronkonkoma, it is certainly can be as much as a 30 to 40-minute drive to Ronkonkoma to access that train service. One of the things that I am trying to do is spur a discussion about where train service does need to be provided and what are the alternatives. We've been very involved in examining East End services. There's been a Volpe study, and a number of groups have been advocating, intra-island train services. Volpe study identified the need for greater bus services on the North Fork. This is an opportunity really to take a look at what should the future be in terms of economic development and growth on the East End. Is commuter rail the right answer? Would there be opportunities, again, from a more long-term vision perspective? Are there opportunities using the Long Island right-of-way, for other modes of transportation to develop better services? Is there a local jurisdiction that would be more encouraged about the opportunity for, say, bus rapid transit? And the other point that I would make is any service that is reduced during a downturned economy and economic bad times can be restored in economic good times. And we would, look, to match the level of service if ridership starts to rebound and return. We were at peak ridership in 2008. We lost about 5.5% of our ridership in 2009. We think that these service reductions match some of those customer losses, and the opportunity, of course, is to restore the service if ridership continues to grow again and exceed our service guidelines, where we need to then reinstitute train service. So if you have any questions, we tried to do a very detailed notice so that you could actually see number of customers impacted and what the alternatives would be.
Anybody have any questions? I mean, all of these recommendations, and that's what they are on the website. We encourage people to comment about them. Obviously, the criteria used, as I indicated earlier, is a question. What should the criteria be to determine a reduction in services? And, with regard to the some of the areas, and not just the Greenport to Ronkonkoma, but there are areas in the Hudson Valley and some areas in New York City. I mean, the question comes down to a simple question. Should all areas of the region receive service because the people there pay the taxes and fees necessary to support the MTA, regardless of how many people use the system and how much it costs? That is a philosophical public policy question, which is not easily answered. It affects the East End of Long Island. It affects some parts of the Hudson Valley. It affects some parts of New York City that are being reduced in service. But that's really the question that this board has to look at and decide how it wants to operate that. Because if you say that there are some areas that, regardless of the fact that they subsidize everybody else, should not get service because there's too few people there using that service, and therefore, since there are too few people using it, it costs more to operate it than other places, that's a very difficult answer to make. I'm not saying it maybe not be the right answer. It is a very difficult answer to make for those people in those regions. And that's something I think this board is going to have to look at in the next couple of months. And we would encourage a response to that question from all interested parties. Because if not these reductions, whether these reductions are the right reductions or the wrong reductions, based upon budgetary issues, and this just does not apply to the Long Island Railroad, what else should be reduced separate from this. Because in some way, some reduction has to take place. That is a discussion I would encourage not only this board, but the people of this region to take up in the next couple of months. With that, we'll go from there.
I am going to turn to our procurements now on page 63. I do want to make one comment that next month we'll be providing you with a little bit of an overview on positive train control, an unfunded federal mandate that requires us to put positive train control in our system. One of the issues with Greenport to Ronkonkoma is a cost avoidance of almost $100 million if, in fact, we're not operating service at a level that the FRA would require positive train control. So that was also one of the factors.
We had that discussion today at Capital Program, which was an interesting discussion, yes, in that regard. Yes.
With that, we're going to turn to procurements. There are 4 procurements in this month's package totaling $1.32 million. There are no items in the non-competitive section, 1 item in the competitive section totaling $200,000, and 3 ratifications in the amount of $1.12 million. The item in the competitive section is a contract modification to Ecology Sanitation Corporation, and we ask for a vote on that item.
Second, any questions on that item? All in favor? Aye. Okay.
There are 3 ratifications in this month's package. Let me say that I have a ratification for a modification to a contract with New York State Industries for the disabled, and this is for cleaning services at Penn and at West Side Yard facilities.
This was the item which was removed last month and is now back, or?
Yes.
This is just a 2-month extension.
2-month
Till we
extension,
clear up
so
all the
we're,
issues.
right. So,
And then
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Anybody have any questions?
vote?
All in favor? And we got you your snow blower.
Good.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Anybody else have anything else? Anything else, Helena?
Nope, that's
Other
it.
than now you can get information on your cell phone, right, after today?
Yes, we're really delighted. This is a free service offered
Right.
by Cuckoo.
A good Long Island company.
Yes,
that's
right.
A
A
good Long Island company.
Hit 266-266, and you can get text message regarding train schedules. And we've already encouraged them to look at fare information and how to put that on text messaging as well.
Excellent. Anybody else have anything? All in favor? Adjourn. Thank you all very much. All in favor. Thank you. We will be starting bridges and tunnels shortly.